Hello everyone, this is Science Professor Obelny. Be a believer. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, you need to subscribe. Okay? This is Science Professor Obelny. Okay? Alright, so today we are going to talk about ecological succession. In Spanish, sucesión ecológico. Okay, so we are going to talk about ecological succession. Okay? Alright, so when we talk about ecological succession, we are talking about a process by which an existing community is replaced by another community. Existing community is being replaced by another community. Okay? Alright, so that's ecological succession. So if we look at this from 300 years ago to present time, so that means it started, this is the same ecosystem, the same piece of land, the same area. It started with barren soil. Then the species crabgrass and horseweed started growing in the same environment. With time, they went to ridgeweed. Okay? So when we talk about succession, it's a process by which an existing community is replaced by another community. Let me ask, for example, to explain succession, we can ask who replaced or who succeeded President Obama? Who succeeded Barack Obama? And the person who succeeded President Obama is Donald Trump. President Donald Trump succeeded President Obama. So that means who came after President Obama in terms of the presidency? And the person who came after President Obama is President Donald Trump. All right. So when we talk about succession, we are talking about who or what comes after, another person or another thing. So here we are looking at the crabgrass, and all these populations or communities of organisms, which one comes after the other? Okay. That's ecological succession. So here, ecological succession is taking place. Okay? That means one species or one community is being replaced with time by another community. So ecological succession simply means the process by which an existing community is replaced by another community. Okay? So it takes time. It started 300 years ago according to this ecological succession graph, and up to present time. So let's look at some questions that follows, this ecological succession graph. All right. So the first one says, if the oak and hickory trees were burned in a forest fire, leaving bare soil, which group of plants will most likely be the first to grow back? So we have the oak tree and the hickory tree. We have the oak tree and hickory tree here. If the oak tree and hickory tree were to be burned by forest fire, which group of plants will most likely be the first to grow back? And the plants that will be the first to grow back will be crabgrass and also horseweed, because they were the pioneer community. They started first from the barren soil. Okay. The next question is, which part represent the most stable in this ecological succession? The most stable in this ecological succession will be the matured, stable hardwood forest. This will be the most stable. This will represent the most stable in this ecological succession. Okay? This will be the most stable. All right? Let's move on. This question is very important. Why is it that each stage is important? Why is each stage important to the stage that follows? Why is each stage important to the stage that follows? Why is it that President Obama's presidency is important for the stage or the next presidency that follows? So why is it important? Why is each stage important to the stage that follows? Why is a mature pine tree important to the oak and hickory tree and forest with pine that follows? Why is this important for this that follows? And the reason why it's important is that each stage modifies the environment for the next stage. Each stage prepares the environment for the next stage. Each stage makes the environment more suitable for the replacement of the next community. All right. So each stage is important because the stage that comes, before prepares or modifies the environment for the next stage that will follow. Okay. So here we look at ecological succession. Okay. Ecological succession refers to the normal gradual changes that occur in the types of species that live in an area. So here we started with pond. We have fishes, aquatic environment, aquatic organisms. With time, the pond was gradually filled with debris. All right, so now we have a swampy area. With time, we see a land community. So that means the existing, fish community or the aquatic organism, they've been replaced by organisms in a land community. When we talk about pioneer species, they are the first living things to inhabit an area. So the first living things to inhabit an area, we call them the pioneer species, the beginning. Okay. The climax community is a community of plants that is relatively stable and undisturbed and has reached an end stage of succession. So the climax community is a stage which is the most stable and it has reached an end stage of succession. Okay? When we look at this, we see a graph here. This graph also represents ecological succession. This graph is also ecological succession graph. The reason why this graph also represents ecological succession is that we see time. That means as time, passes by, we see the mass of the plant and we see grasses, we see different populations of organisms. The grasses, they represent one population. The shrub, they represent one population. The spruce tree, the maple tree, they all represent different populations of organisms. Okay? They are different species. When we talk about population, remember, population is made up of all organisms of a species that live in an area at a time. So during this time, this grass here was the first, species that started. Okay, the grass here was the first species that started. Okay, and that represents the population of grass. The birch tree also represents population of the next organism that followed with time. Okay, so when we talk about species, remember species, they are closely related organisms that can mate and produce fertile offspring. Population means the same organisms of the same species, the total number of organisms of the same species living in an area. Okay, so here we have individual organisms. That is a species. Then when you have population, that means you have the same kind of organisms, the same species, number of the same species living in an area. That represent population. And when you have different population, it forms community. Okay, so here we have community of organisms, different populations in an area. And when you see the community interacting with their abiotic factors, that forms ecosystem. So community is biotic. Community is all the living organisms, different populations in an area. Ecosystem is the biotic plus the abiotic interactions in the environment. Okay, So when we also look at this, here we see changes. This table says changes in plant species over time. So that means as time, passes by, we have changes in the plant species. Okay, so if you look at the left column, we see year from 1985. 1985, the dominant plant species observed was grasses. So during that time, we have grasses. 1995, we have shrubs and bushes. In 2005, the most dominant plant species observed was cherry, birch, and also poplar trees. Okay, so this means that from 1985 we have grasses. 1995, now we have different population or different community. They have replaced the grasses, and this is ecological succession. In 2005, these population or these community have replaced these organisms. So that means ecological succession has taken place. That means new organisms have replaced the old organism, the old community, and that is ecological succession. So if you look at it, this graph represents ecological succession because you have time, and with time, new organisms are being replaced in the same piece or the same ecosystem. We are looking at the same area of land, the same ecosystem, but with time, we see different populations inhabiting that same place. This graph, this table also represents ecological succession because it's showing us that, as time passes by, in 1985, we have grasses. In 1995, we have shrubs and bushes. In 2005, we have different kinds of organisms in the area. Okay? So these two diagrams, they represent ecological succession. This diagram also represents ecological succession because with time, the pond and all the organisms in the aquatic environment, they've been replaced. Okay? With time, they are being replaced gradually, and this takes time. This diagram also represents ecological succession. Why? We started with barren or bare field. With time, we see grass state. Then we see the shrub state. Then we see the pine state. Then we see the hardwood forest. So that means with time, they've been replaced by different communities or different organisms or populations. Okay, so all these graphs, they represent ecological succession. This also represents ecological succession. It represents ecological succession because with time, the organism, the communities, they are being replaced by another community. Ecological succession simply means the process by which an existing community is replaced by another community. All right. Remember, whenever you think about ecological succession, succession simply means who or what comes after what. The question is, why is each stage important to the stage that follows? Why is the pine stage important to the mature pines and young deciduous tree? The reason why this stage is important to the stage that will follow is that each stage modifies the environment for the next stage. So the pine stage here modifies the environment for the next stage, which is the mature pine and young deciduous tree. This stage is also important because it modifies the environment for the oak and hickory forest with pine. So each stage makes the environment more suitable for the replacement community. Each stage makes the environment more suitable for the replacement community.